Nothing quite prepared me for the chill that ran down my spine when my sister casually pointed to the shed and said, "You're used to leftovers, right?" She didn't whisper it. She didn't lower her gaze or hide a smirk. She just handed me a paper plate, turned her back, and disappeared into her house, where the rest of my family sat under golden chandeliers and the glow of expensive fixtures. I stood there for a moment, fingers tightening around that flimsy, greasy plate, my two kids, Lyle and Zoe, standing behind me. Lyle, 12, tall for his age, the quiet, thoughtful type who's learned too early that words can be knives. Zoe, 9, still young enough to believe in the best of people, but old enough to sense when something's wrong. Neither of them said a word, but I could feel their eyes on me waiting for my response. I didn't let my shoulders sag or my smile falter. I had a responsibility to be the steady one, the unbreakable one. I forced a tight smile and nodded toward the small, cluttered shed at the end of the driveway. "Come on, kids. Let's get settled." The shed was exactly what you'd expect, dusty, cramped, and filled with the forgotten remnants of past projects and castaway furniture. An old card table was pushed against the wall. 2 metal chairs unfolded nearby, and a wooden crate sat lopsided in the corner, its top splintered. The place smelled faintly of paint thinner and rust. No decorations, no warmth, just the creak of old wood and the rattle of the wind against the thin walls. I watched Lyle drag a chair to the table, his face tightening into the expression he gets when he's trying not to cry, and Zoe carefully setting her paper plate down like it might break the moment she released it. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I wasn't angry. I was done with anger a long time ago. This was something deeper, an acceptance maybe, or a final break in a long silent fracture. As I unpacked the small plastic container of mashed potatoes and the lukewarm turkey slices my sister had handed me, I felt a strange, steady calm settle over me. I'd been trying to force a bond with a family that had always seen me as the odd one out, the messy sister, the one who didn't quite fit the polished image they projected at every holiday gathering. I'd convinced myself that if I just showed up enough, if I smiled wide enough, if I brought enough sweet potato pie, maybe they'd finally let me in. Maybe they'd see me as more than a background character in their perfectly curated lives. But as I watched Zoe poke at her food and Lyle grit his teeth, I realized how much I'd been asking my kids to endure for the sake of appearances. I glanced at the cracked window where I could just make out the shadowy figures moving inside the house, clinking glasses and laughing. I imagined my mother, a glass of her beloved white wine in hand, telling one of her polished half-true stories about her daughters, the successful one and the other one. I felt something harden in my chest, not anger, but something colder, more precise. It felt like a steel cable pulling taut, a moment of pure, unbreakable resolve. I wouldn't let this be the memory my kids carried with them, the smell of musty fabric, the chill of a shed in late November, the sharp clatter of plastic forks on paper plates. Then it happened. Just as I thought we'd been neatly boxed away from the main event, I heard the gravel crunch under tires. I looked up through the smeared, cobwebbed window. A sleek black limousine rolled into the driveway, its polished surface reflecting the sharp winter light. It pulled in slowly, deliberately, like a scene from a movie, the kind where the hero arrives just in time to change everything. The engine cut off, and the long, dark silhouette of the driver stepped out crisp in his uniform, glancing briefly at the house before circling to the back door. I saw my sister's silhouette freeze in the dining room window wine glass halfway to her lips. The chatter inside grew muffled, a sudden, awkward silence filling the space where laughter had just been. The back door of the limo opened and a tall, elegant woman stepped out. Her coat was a deep, rich blue, the kind that costs more than my rent tailored perfectly to her sharp, graceful frame. She paused for a moment, taking in the sprawling house, the well-manicured lawn, and then to my shock, she turned and walked straight toward the shed. I felt Lyle's eyes on me wide and unsure, and Zoe leaned closer, her small fingers finding mine under the edge of the table. I held my breath as the woman reached the shed door, her heels clicking against the cracked pavement. She knocked once, the sound sharp and deliberate, cutting through the thick, cold air. I stood up, my legs a little shaky, and cracked the door open. She smiled, her eyes locking onto mine with a warmth that felt out of place in this cold, forgotten corner of my sister's perfect world. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice smooth, her gaze unwavering. "I'm looking for the owner of this house." I hesitated, my heart hammering. She couldn't possibly mean me. I was the one shunted to the sidelines, the one left in the shed with my kids far from the chandeliers and polished silver. I opened the door a bit wider, the cold seeping into my bones. "That would be my sister," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "She's inside." The woman tilted her head, her smile growing just a fraction. "I'm not looking for her." She glanced at the table at Lyle and Zoe, then back at me. "I believe you're the one I came to see." And just like that, the air in the shed changed. I felt my spine straighten, the cold slipping from my skin, replaced by a sudden, impossible warmth. My kids looked up at me, eyes wide, their breaths visible in the cold, musty air. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. I blinked, trying to process her words. I'd been overlooked, pushed aside, and dismissed for so long that the idea of someone coming specifically to see me felt almost surreal. I glanced at my kids. Lyle's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing in that way he does when he's trying to figure out if a grown-up is lying to him. Zoe's small fingers squeezed mine, her breath coming in quick, sharp puffs. "May I come in?" the woman asked, peeking past my shoulder at the cramped, dusty shed. She made no move to step back, no wrinkle of the nose at the stale air or cluttered corners. If anything, she looked intrigued, her sharp, dark eyes taking in every detail. I pushed the door open further, my heart still hammering, and gestured to the single rickety chair that hadn't yet been claimed. She smiled and stepped inside, the crisp click of her heels against the old wooden floor echoing in the small space. "Thank you," she said, easing into the chair with a grace that seemed completely at odds with the rough, splintered wood. She crossed her legs, rested her gloved hands on her knee, and took a slow, measured breath like she had all the time in the world. I glanced at my kids. Lyle had straightened up, his shoulders squared, his eyes locked on the woman as if trying to figure out if she was friend or foe. Zoe leaned in closer to me, her small body half hiding behind my hip, her eyes wide and curious. "I'm sorry," I said, still struggling to catch up, "but who are you?" She smiled again, a flash of perfect teeth. "My name is Vivian Ellis," she said, her voice calm, each word precise and deliberate. "I run a foundation that supports single parents, particularly those who've faced difficult family situations. We focus on helping them rebuild, find their voice, and stand tall in a world that too often tries to push them down." I felt my breath catch. The words felt like a lifeline tossed into a storm. I had no idea who this woman was, but something about her calm, unwavering gaze told me she wasn't here by accident. "I read an article you wrote a few years back," she continued, leaning forward slightly, "about finding your place in a world that constantly tries to define you. It resonated with me. You have a gift, a way of seeing the world that cuts through the noise. We need voices like yours." I blinked, my mind racing. I hadn't thought about that blog post in years. I'd written it late one night, the kids asleep in the next room, my heart raw from a particularly rough day. I'd poured everything I had into those words, thinking maybe a handful of people would read it, that maybe my small, desperate voice would find an echo somewhere. Vivian reached into her sleek leather handbag and pulled out a slim, cream-colored envelope. She held it out to me, her eyes steady, her expression kind but unwavering. "I want to offer you a chance to speak at our annual conference," she said. "It's a platform for people who've faced struggles and found their strength. I think your story belongs there." I stared at the envelope, my hands trembling. Lyle leaned in, his eyes darting between me and the woman, his jaw tightening as he tried to make sense of the situation. Zoe, sensing the shift, slipped her small hand into mine, her fingers cold but steady. I don't understand," I managed, my voice cracking. "Why me?" Vivian's smile softened, and for a moment I saw something deeply human in her eyes, a flicker of shared understanding of quiet resilience. "Because you're the kind of person who turns a shed into a sanctuary," she said, simply glancing around at the small, cluttered space, the mismatched chairs, the cold metal table where my children had tried to sit with dignity. "Because you refuse to be defined by the scraps you're given." She stood up, her movements as fluid and precise as before, and placed the envelope on the table. "Think about it," she said, her eyes locking onto mine one last time. "I think you'll find the answer is already in your heart." And with that, she turned, her heels clicking sharply against the old wooden floor as she stepped back into the cold November air. She paused at the doorway, her silhouette framed by the harsh gray light filtering through the thin walls. "Oh, and don't worry about the details," she added, tossing a warm, knowing smile over her shoulder. "We'll take care of everything. Just say yes." The door creaked shut behind her, the sharp sound cutting through the cold, musty air, and I was left standing there, my kids beside me, the cream-colored envelope resting on the table, heavy with promise. Lyle looked up at me, his eyes wide, his expression a mix of confusion and cautious hope. Zoe tugged at my sleeve, her small face upturned, her eyes bright with the kind of innocent belief that only a child can muster. "Mom," she whispered, her breath a small, visible puff in the cold air. Is this a good thing?" I looked down at her, my heart swelling with 1,000 emotions I couldn't name. "Yes," I whispered, pulling them both into a tight hug. "Yes, I think it might be." The shed felt smaller once Vivian left, the air thicker, the silence stretching. I sat down, my knees weak, and reached for the cream-colored envelope. My fingers hesitated over the smooth paper, the weight of the moment sinking in. Lyle watched me carefully, his dark eyes sharp and alert, while Zoe leaned against my shoulder, her tiny breaths warm against my arm. I took a deep breath, slipping my thumb under the flap, careful not to tear it. The paper slid out smoothly, crisp and heavy, the kind you see in offices with polished mahogany desks and views of city skylines. I unfolded it slowly, my eyes scanning the elegant, slanted handwriting. "Dear Ms. Rivera, we are pleased to formally invite you to share your story at our annual conference, Voices of Resilience. We believe your journey embodies the strength, courage, and unbreakable spirit our organization seeks to uplift. Your voice is powerful, and your story deserves to be heard. We will handle all travel accommodations and support necessary to ensure your message reaches those who need it most. Please consider this an opportunity to reclaim your narrative, to step out of the shadows and into the light you deserve. We look forward to hearing from you. With respect and admiration, Vivian Ellis." I let out a slow breath, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. Lyle leaned in, his eyes darting across the page, trying to make sense of the words. Zoe tilted her head, her curls brushing my cheek. "What does it say, Mom?" she whispered, her voice tinged with that bright, innocent hope I'd been trying to protect for so long. It's an invitation," I managed, my voice thick. "An invitation to share our story." Lyle's jaw tightened, his shoulders squaring as if bracing for a blow. Like a speech, he asked, his voice low and guarded, like he was testing the weight of the idea. I nodded, my fingers tracing the edge of the letter. Yes, something like that. I felt my heart flutter, a strange, unfamiliar mixture of fear and excitement. It had been so long since I'd felt anything close to this, a spark of possibility, a flicker of potential in a life that had felt increasingly like a series of dead ends. Zoe's small hand found mine, her fingers curling around my own. "You should do it, Mom," she said, her eyes bright with that unshakable belief only a child can muster. "Tell them about us." I looked at her, my heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. I wanted to say yes, to grab hold of this lifeline with both hands and never let go. But doubt crept in, whispering old, familiar fears. What if I wasn't enough? What if my voice, my story, my struggles weren't worthy of the stage Vivian was offering? What if I failed, stumbled, or froze under the spotlight? But then I looked at my kids, their small, brave faces peering up at me, their lives already filled with too many disappointments and too few celebrations. And I knew I couldn't let that fear win. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it back into the envelope, my hands no longer shaking. I glanced at the shed's grimy window, catching a glimpse of the sprawling house beyond the place where I had once hoped to find a place at the table. "All right," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "We're doing this." Lyle's lips twitched, almost forming a smile, while Zoe bounced on her toes, her eyes sparkling. "Really?" she whispered, her voice tinged with awe. "Really?" I replied, pulling them both into a tight hug, the rough wood of the table digging into my side, the cold air nipping at our cheeks. "We're done sitting in the shadows. It's time we take our place in the light." As we packed up the leftovers and prepared to leave, I felt the weight on my shoulders lift, if only a little. I didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope, a tiny, defiant spark refusing to be snuffed out. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, I sat down at my small, battered desk, the one squeezed into the corner of our cramped living room, and opened my laptop. The screen blinked to life, the glow casting long shadows across the room. The only sound, the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft rustle of wind against the thin apartment walls. I stared at the blank document, the cursor blinking steadily, waiting for me to breathe life into it. My fingers hovered over the keys, my mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts, memories, and fears. And then slowly, I began to type. I wrote about the years of being overlooked, the whispered conversations I wasn't meant to hear, the forced smiles at family gatherings where I felt more like a ghost than a sister, a daughter, a woman. I wrote about the tiny daily indignities I had endured for the sake of peace, the countless sacrifices I had made, the dreams I had set aside for the sake of my children, for the sake of belonging. I wrote until my fingers ached, until my eyes burned with unshed tears, until the words on the screen blurred together into a raw, unfiltered testament to a life lived on the margins. When I finally stopped, my head throbbing and my heart racing, I leaned back in my chair, my breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. I saved the document, my heart pounding as I typed the title, Finding My Voice. I closed the laptop, the room suddenly too small, too quiet, too filled with the echoes of old ghosts and unspoken regrets. I stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the dark, quiet street, the distant glow of city lights flickering on the horizon. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. The morning after I sent my acceptance to Vivian, the world felt different. The gray winter light filtering through my thin apartment curtain seemed a bit brighter, the air a bit crisper. I had taken a step, a small but significant one, and for the first time in years, I felt the faintest hint of freedom. Lyle and Zoe were already up, their quiet whispers echoing down the hall as they debated which cereal to have for breakfast. I leaned against the door frame for a moment, watching them huddle over the kitchen table, their heads close together, their giggles soft and unguarded. It hit me then how long it had been since I'd seen them this carefree, this normal. I cleared my throat, stepping into the tiny kitchen. "Morning, you two." They looked up, their faces brightening in that way that never fails to lift my spirits. Lyle straightened his shoulders, relaxing as he offered a small smile. Zoe bounced in her chair, her curls bobbing, her eyes sparkling. "Morning, Mom." Zoe chirped, her spoon clattering against the side of her bowl. "Are we still doing it, the speech thing?" I felt a rush of warmth spread through my chest. "Yeah," I said, grabbing a cup from the cupboard and pouring myself some coffee. "We're doing it." Lyle's eyes flicked to Zoe, a silent conversation passing between them, and I felt a pang of gratitude. They had each other, these two brave, resilient kids, and that was more than enough for me. As I sipped my coffee, the bitter warmth seeping into my bones, my phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up, my heart skipping a beat when I saw the name flashing on the screen. Vivian Ellis. I glanced at the kids, then slipped into the hallway, pressing the phone to my ear. "Hello?" "Callie." "Good morning." Vivian's voice was bright, her tone as crisp as her tailored coat had been the day before. "I just received your email, and I'm thrilled you've decided to join us. I knew you had the courage to take this step." I felt my cheeks flush, a mix of pride and nerves tightening in my chest. "Thank you." I managed, leaning against the wall, my fingers gripping the cool metal of the doorframe. I'm a little nervous, if I'm being honest. Vivian chuckled a warm, throaty sound that instantly eased some of my tension. Nerves are good, Callie. They mean you care. And trust me, that passion is what makes a speech powerful. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I hadn't felt this kind of nervous energy in years, the kind that makes your palms sweat and your heart race, the kind that reminds you you're alive. We'll be sending a team to help you prepare. Vivian continued, her tone reassuring. Writers, speech coaches, even a stylist if you want one. We take care of our people, Callie. You're not alone in this. I swallowed, my throat suddenly tight. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words, how starved I had been for real support. Thank you, I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. I appreciate it. She paused for a moment, the line crackling faintly. Oh, and Callie. Yeah, I read the first draft of your speech, she said, her tone softening. It's powerful. Raw. Don't hold back. The world needs to hear your truth. I felt a lump form in my throat, a rush of emotion threatening to overwhelm me. Thank you, I whispered again, unable to find the right words to capture the storm of gratitude and fear swirling inside me. After we hung up, I stood there for a moment, the phone still clutched in my hand, my mind racing. I could do this. I had to do this. For myself, for my kids, for every single person who had ever felt small, unseen, or unworthy. The next few weeks passed in a blur. The foundation sent a team of writers and coaches to my apartment, their sharp suits and polished smiles a stark contrast to my cluttered living room and mismatched furniture. They brought laptops, notebooks, and an energy that seemed to crackle in the small space, filling it with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. We spent hours refining my words, shaping my story into something sharp and unbreakable, a blade forged from years of silent suffering and quiet endurance. I told them about the Thanksgiving dinners spent in garages, the family photos where I had always been just out of frame, the countless small cuts that had scarred my heart, but never broken my spirit. They listened, nodding and scribbling, their eyes bright with the thrill of crafting a message that could cut through the noise that could shatter the polished facade of families like mine. At night, after they left, I would sit with Lyle and Zoe on the couch, our legs tangled under a threadbare blanket, watching old movies and eating popcorn, the warmth of their small bodies against mine, a comfort I had long taken for granted. Mom, Lyle said one night, his voice hesitant, his eyes fixed on the flickering TV screen. You're not going to change, right? Just because of this speech thing. I felt a pang in my chest, the fear in his voice cutting deeper than any insult my family had ever thrown at me. I reached over, pulling him into a tight hug, his bony shoulders sharp against my cheek. No, baby, I whispered, pressing my lips to the top of his head. I promise. No matter what happens, I'll still be me. I'll still be your mom. He relaxed against me, his small, wiry frame slowly sinking into my embrace, and I felt the sharp, sweet ache of love bloom in my chest. As the credits rolled, I glanced at Zoe, her head resting on my shoulder, her breathing slow and steady, already half asleep. I tightened my grip on them both, my heart swelling with a fierce protective love. I would give them the life they deserved, the one I had always dreamed of but never quite believed I could reach. I would step into the light, not just for myself, but for them, for the small, brave souls who had stood by my side in every dark moment. As the date of the conference crept closer, my small apartment transformed into a makeshift war room. Drafts of my speech covered every flat surface, sticky notes clung to the fridge and walls, and my laptop whirred softly in the corner, its screen filled with paragraphs of carefully chosen words. The Foundation's team had been relentless, but encouraging, pushing me to dig deeper, to strip away the polite, sanitized version of my story I had first tried to write and replace it with the raw, unfiltered truth. They wanted the messy parts, the heartbreak, the moments of quiet despair and fierce resilience. I had rewritten the speech so many times that the words felt like part of my bloodstream, each syllable etched into my mind. Yet every time I stood in front of my cracked bathroom mirror trying to practice the opening lines, my voice felt small. My reflection, a stranger. One evening, as the kids slept, I found myself staring at the reflection of my own tired eyes, the harsh bathroom light casting deep shadows across my face. My hair, pulled back into a messy bun, had started to gray at the temples, thin streaks of silver that I hadn't noticed until recently. I took a deep breath, the cool porcelain of the sink sharp against my palms. "You can do this," I whispered, my breath fogging the mirror. "You're not the scared, silent girl they tried to make you. You're more than the scraps they left you." The words echoed in the small space, a fragile promise to myself. The day before the conference, a sleek black car pulled up outside my building, its polished frame gleaming in the winter sun. The driver, a tall, sharp-looking man in a dark suit, stepped out and tipped his cap as I approached my small overnight bag clutched tightly in my hand. "Miss Rivera?" he asked, his tone professional but kind. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yes, that's me." He took my bag, his gloved hands careful and precise, and held the door open for me. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers brushing the cold metal of the doorframe, my breath catching in my throat. This was it, the point of no return. I glanced back at my building, the small brick facade that had been my sanctuary and my prison for so long. I thought of Lyle and Zoe, their wide eyes and tight hugs that morning, their whispered promises to watch my speech online, their small voices reminding me to be brave. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped into the car. The ride to the conference hotel felt surreal. The city slipping by in a blur of gray and glass, the skyline sharp against the pale winter sky. The driver said little, his focus fixed on the road, and I found myself lost in my thoughts, my fingers twisting in my lap. When we pulled up to the hotel, a tall, glass-covered tower with sleek, polished doors and a doorman in a crisp navy uniform, my stomach flipped. The lobby was bustling with sharply dressed people, their voices a low, constant hum, the air tinged with the faint scent of expensive cologne and fresh-cut flowers. Vivian met me just inside the entrance, her hair pulled back into a neat chignon, her suit sharp and perfectly tailored, her eyes bright as she swept me into a warm, unexpected hug. "Callie, you made it," she said, pulling back to hold me at arm's length, her eyes scanning my face as if searching for cracks. "How are you feeling?" I managed a shaky smile. Terrified, I admitted, my voice trembling. She chuckled, her grip tightening on my shoulders. "Good. That means you care." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And trust me, you're going to be amazing." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, my eyes stinging. She led me through the lobby, past clusters of polished, confident people in designer suits and sharp heels, their conversations a blur of networking and small talk. We stepped into a private elevator, the doors sliding shut with a soft mechanical hum, and I felt my pulse quicken as we began to rise. The suite they had reserved for me was larger than my entire apartment. The walls lined with windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, the setting sun casting long golden shadows across the polished floors. Vivian gestured to a small, elegantly set table by the window where a bottle of champagne and a basket of fresh fruit waited. "Take a moment to breathe," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You've earned this." I sank into one of the plush chairs, my fingers curling around the cool stem of a champagne flute, my eyes drawn to the horizon. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of the city below. Vivian smiled, a quiet, knowing expression that spoke volumes. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow you change the world." That night, alone in my suite, I stood by the window, the city lights stretching out below me like a sea of possibilities. I thought of my kids, their small, brave faces, their whispered encouragements, their unshakable belief in me. I pulled out my laptop, its screen casting a pale glow in the dimly lit room, and opened my speech one last time. My fingers hovered over the keys, the cursor blinking steadily, a silent challenge. Slowly, deliberately, I added a final line, a small but powerful promise to myself, to my kids, to the woman I had spent so long trying to find. I am not a whisper in the shadows. I am a voice, and I will be heard. I saved the document, closed the laptop, and leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Tomorrow, I would step onto that stage not as a sister in the garage, not as a forgotten daughter, but as a woman reclaiming her place in the world. The morning of the conference, I woke to the soft, early light filtering through the thick hotel curtains, the city still waking beneath me. I lay there for a moment staring at the ceiling, my heart racing, my mind buzzing with 1,000 half-formed thoughts. Today was the day. I forced myself out of bed, my bare feet sinking into the plush carpet as I crossed the room to the window. I pulled the curtains open, the cold winter sun flooding the suite, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished floors. I had always imagined a moment like this, a moment where I would stand on the edge of something big, something life-changing. But the reality felt so much heavier, the air around me thick with anticipation and fear. I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening on the edge of the thick velvet curtain. "You can do this," I whispered to my reflection in the glass, my breath fogging the cold surface. "You've survived worse." The hours leading up to the conference blurred together. Hair, makeup, wardrobe, each piece falling into place like armor, transforming me from the tired, struggling woman in the garage into someone polished, someone powerful, someone worthy of being heard. Vivian appeared in my suite just before it was time to head downstairs, her sharp suit immaculate, her eyes bright with excitement. She crossed the room in quick, confident strides, her hands reaching for mine, her grip firm and reassuring. "You look incredible, Callie," she said, her voice warm but steady. "Are you ready?" I managed a shaky smile, my stomach churning. "As ready as I'll ever be." She squeezed my hands, her eyes locking onto mine, the warmth in her gaze steadying the storm inside me. "Remember," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "you're not just telling your story. You're telling theirs. For every woman who's ever felt small, for every mother who's ever been pushed into the shadows. You are their voice." I felt a lump form in my throat, my eyes stinging. I squeezed her hands back, my fingers trembling. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice breaking. She smiled, her eyes softening. "No, Callie, thank you." The backstage area was a maze of wires, cameras, and hushed conversations, the air thick with the electric buzz of anticipation. I stood just behind the curtain, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the muffled hum of the audience beyond. A stagehand approached his headset, crackling, his eyes darting between the clipboard in his hands and my face. "Ms. Rivera," he said, his tone professional but hurried. "You're on in 2 minutes." I nodded, my fingers gripping the thin, worn pages of my speech, the words smudged with nervous fingerprints, the edges frayed from weeks of anxious handling. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, shaky breath, the sounds of the conference hall blending into a low, indistinct hum. I pictured Lyle and Zoe, their small, hopeful faces, their whispered promises to watch me online, their tiny hands clutching mine in the cold, forgotten corners of my sister's house. They were my why. The stagehand gave me a small, encouraging nod, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder for a brief, comforting moment. "You've got this," he whispered, his eyes meeting mine for a heartbeat before he turned and melted back into the shadows. I straightened, squared my shoulders, and stepped forward, the bright, blinding lights of the stage swallowing me whole. The first few seconds were a blur, a rush of hot, blinding lights, the muffled roar of applause, the sharp, metallic taste of fear on my tongue. I forced myself to blink my eyes, adjusting to the glare, the dark silhouettes of the audience slowly coming into focus, their faces tilted toward me, expectant, curious, waiting. I reached the center of the stage, the small wireless microphone clipped to my dress, a cold, unfamiliar weight against my collarbone. I gripped the edges of the thin, crumpled paper in my hands, my fingers trembling, my heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my teeth. For a terrifying moment, I felt the words slip from my mind, the carefully crafted sentences I had agonized over for weeks dissolving into static, my brain blank, my throat tight. But then I glanced down, my eyes locking onto the title I had scrawled across the top of the first page, the words sharp and dark against the crumpled paper. Finding my voice. I took a deep breath, my lungs filling with the cool, dry air of the stage, and the words came rushing back, the floodgates cracking open, the dam breaking. I grew up in a family that loved the idea of perfection. I began my voice shaky but growing stronger with each word, my gaze sweeping across the silent, attentive crowd. A family that believed in appearances and curated images and carefully chosen words in polished silverware and perfectly folded napkins. But I was never perfect. I was messy. I was loud. I was too much. A ripple of quiet chuckles swept through the audience, the tension in the room easing just a fraction, the harsh, blinding lights suddenly a little less daunting. I spent years trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. I continued, my voice growing stronger, my heart pounding with a fierce, defiant rhythm. I shrank myself, twisted myself, bent myself into shapes I didn't recognize, all for the faint, distant hope of being seen, of being accepted, of being enough. I paused, my breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts, the pages in my hands trembling, the crowd leaning in their faces, a sea of silent, attentive shadows. But here's what I've learned. I said, my voice breaking my throat tight with the weight of years of silent endurance, of quiet suffering. You don't have to beg for a seat at a table that refuses to make room for you. You don't have to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's picture of perfection. I straightened my spine, stiffening my heart swelling. You can build your own table. You can claim your own space. You can find your voice even when the world tries to silence you. I took a deep breath, the heat of the stage lights searing my skin, the air in my lungs sharp and cold, my heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my teeth. Because here's the truth, I said, my voice ringing out clear and strong, cutting through the thick, expectant silence. You are not the scraps they left you. You are not the shadows they pushed you into. You are more than their neglect, their indifference, their whispered judgments. I paused, the room so silent I could hear my own heartbeat, the blood rushing in my ears. You are enough. The final word hung in the air, sharp and defiant, a battle cry, a declaration, a promise. And then the room exploded. The applause crashed over me like a wave, the sound sharp and deafening. The bright, blinding lights flaring like the sun breaking through a storm. I felt the heat of it, the weight of it, the raw electric rush of validation and freedom. My heart swelling, my breath coming in sharp, jagged bursts. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. For the first time in my life, I felt heard. Story 2. Clown. Thanks for the cash. Don't come, please. My sister cashed my money and laughed. Perfect, I said with a smile. On the big day, I submitted an official notice canceling the wedding and surreptitiously canceled the transfers that evening. The arena was silent and deserted as a huge black box was wheeled in. Then the show began. Clown, thanks for the cash. Emma's voice cut like a dagger across the family group chat as she chuckled. Just don't come. I gazed at the text. At the top of my screen, the payment notification is still active. She claimed that $2,500 had been sent directly into her account for wedding-related expenses. Necessities like matching silk robes for her and her bridesmaids and a spa weekend. Through the text, I seemed to be able to hear her smug chuckle. Excellent, I responded back, smiling at my laptop. It wasn't a smile of friendliness. It wasn't a grin of forgiveness. It was the type of smile you give someone immediately before you ignite the match. That evening, while Emma and my parents likely raised a glass to their own genius, I surreptitiously checked all of the payment portals associated with the wedding, including those for the caterer's venue, florist, and photographer. I then froze the payments one by one. No reimbursement, not a warning, simply frozen. You wouldn't believe how simple it was when the contracts are in your name. Generosity is a funny thing. Before realizing it came with power, they didn't understand, they adored it. I sent the last mail after that. Not to the family group chat, not to Emma. I forwarded it to all of the guests, an event update body in a straightforward BCC email topic. Emma and Derek's wedding has been called off. Please don't go to the location. More information will be provided soon. I appreciate your understanding. No apology, no explanation. All that was left of her big day was a black hole. The text began to pour in by daybreak. Confusion, I suppose. Suppliers, enraged. Emma, quiet. I was informed by the venue workers that they had never witnessed something such. Half-assembled florists squabbling in the parking lot chairs still in plastic tables. After I had set up a huge black box that was 6 feet broad and 10 feet tall, it arrived on schedule on a dolly and moved into the silent, empty corridor. Nobody was aware of its contents. They would, but not yet. As well as when they did. He would never be viewed the same way by anyone again. It was 2 months before chaos erupted. I was still the idiot who thought it was important to aid relatives. Emma had spent 10 years organizing her wedding as if it were the most important royal occasion. She wanted everything to be Instagrammable, including a statement cake, a designer clothing, and a unique location. And to whom did she seek assistance? Me, because I had a reliable employment, as I didn't voice any complaints, as they were aware of my funds, since I was the trustworthy one. It began modestly. Here and there, a couple $100. Are you able to pay the deposit? Next paycheck, I'll reimburse you. Just assist the photographer. Mom promised to divide it. There was always a fresh falsehood after every promise, and I always reminded myself that it was family. It was my younger sister, Emma, but I knew better in my heart. Naturally, Dad's poison was different. He made no overt request for money. He insisted on it. True guys don't take advantage of their families. Once, when I was hesitant to give him a credit card for a minor emergency cost, he stated, "She was the quiet martyr mom, only till the wedding is over." Instead of assisting a pampered adult kid, she would groan as if she were bearing the weight of the world. The others were worse. At a family cookout, my cousin began to fool around. "Loud enough for everyone to hear," one of them remarked. "When will Emma include Big Bro as a sponsor on the wedding invitations?" Everyone chuckled. Emma too. I laughed too hard. False. Counting from 10 backwards. Thus, I refrained from hurling a bottle of beer across the yard. The worst part followed. One evening, Emma shared a picture of herself carrying the personalized bridal gown, and the family group chat went crazy. $8,000 for fantasy and lace. She penned a note of gratitude to the actual people who made this possible underneath. Without my future spouse and my incredible friends, I couldn't have succeeded. Don't bring me up. Not even a tag. I spent a lot of time looking at the screen. I get a sensation in my chest. Tear and twist. I hadn't only donated cash. That outfit had been paid for by me. She really laughed and told to calm down when I challenged her about it. "You know, it doesn't really matter. You're not the vibe, you're simply the money." "Well, son, you can't buy love," my father remarked, giving me a pat on the back. "Before you find yourself alone, learn that." They saw me as a clown who covered the expenses but avoided being in the pictures. Then things worsened. I discovered that $200 was gone from my checking account 2 weeks before to the wedding. Transfer without authorization. Indeed, who was the owner of the associated account, Emma's? She said it was an error when I questioned her about it, because she believed it to be her own story. Furthermore, because I already make so much "what's the big deal," I went cold. This went beyond just rudeness. It was stealing. This was betrayal, disguised as dazzling artificial nails and a false grin. Mom silenced when I told her. "Let's avoid dramatizing the wedding," I informed my father. He let out a bark. "You're an adult who is upset about a few dollars." I became aware that I had been alone for a while at that same moment. The humiliation in public. 1 week prior to the big day, the last slap occurred. A TikTok was posted by Emma. I had no idea that she had filmed it. I was standing awkwardly reading through my phone while waiting outside a bridal shop with her dress bag in hand. She had captioned it. "Thank you for the money when your brother is your wedding sponsor." It spread like wildfire. Hundreds of comments and tens of thousands of views, giggling at the pitiful brother who is footing the bill. I was even recognized from my job. "Hey, is that you?" My colleague sent me a screenshot via SMS. I became numb, and then I saw the evidence with my own eyes. I discovered everything that same evening when browsing her wedding planning app, which she had inadvertently left open on my laptop. Spreadsheets that detail the precise way she allocated the sponsor funds amongst spa days and pals. She joked in our group conversations that she could pretend to weep if I ever became suspicious, calling me Plan B and walking ATM voice memos. There was more than one negative instance. It was intentional. It was practiced. They were who they were. The strategy. I downloaded everything of it. Every voice memo, every receipt, every conversation. I then reclined in my chair and gazed out the window, which was dark. Like many stars, the city lights flash. They wanted a clown, I concluded. All right. I put up the best performance in the world for them, the preparation for the collapse. 2 days prior to the wedding, the venue's last payments were due. Whose card was on file, you ask mine. I could have just called it quits. It would have been mercy, though. I wanted them to see it fall apart. I froze each payment instead. The caterer and the venue are both frozen. The florist froze, the DJ froze. I did not make a call. I didn't elaborate. I just waited for the stillness to deepen. I distributed the message to the visitors in the interim. The wedding has been canceled. Please don't come. Additionally, I made arrangements for a final delivery to the location, the enormous black box. It would be visible to them. Everyone would, as well as when they opened it. As the facts came to light, they would recognize the precise person who drew back the curtain like smoke from a botched magic performance. It wouldn't be the clown either. It would be responsible for their own embarrassment. Emma's special day began with a gloomy and dreary morning. Even she was unable to ignore the omen. I got there early, not in the role of a brother, not as a visitor even, as the mastermind of her ideal humiliation. The place seemed oddly quiet. White chair rows with half-empty tables, centerpieces that are fading, unpaid caterers who had left them behind. Don't laugh, not a word. No procession of visitors arriving, just strain and chilly wind, sufficiently thick to cut through. Emma, wearing a $1,000 lace dress, was pacing close to the entrance. Her phone was held up to her ear. There was panic in every step. Across the deserted courtyard, her voice broke. "Where is everyone?" "There where?" She called once more. Once more, her sanity was being eroded by every ignored call. Red-faced and yelling, Dad rushed to the event planner. "You are to blame for this." "Something went wrong on your end." The coordinator simply shook her head, a weary lady who appeared to despise her work even more than usual. "No, sir. Yesterday we were informed that the event had been canceled. We posted the advisory and notified vendors." Emma's shrieking turned on. "What? Take note. By whom was it sent?" I watched from a distance like a composed gladiator spectator as it all happened, and finally, the icing on the cake. The driveway was approached by a delivery van. Everybody froze. A huge matte black box was carefully rolled out on a dolly by 2 men in black uniforms, 6 feet in diameter, 10 feet in height, no markings, no labels. Emma's face contorted in fear and bewilderment. "What is that?" Dad shouted at the guys. "Hello, we don't own that." Leave it here, however. Since I had signed the delivery order, the delivery men disregarded him. The box was placed exactly in the middle of the vacant wedding arch. The throng, how little. Venue personnel were present, perplexed. Caterers. Emma's 2 bewildered bridesmaids watched in paralyzed silence. Then the mechanism inside the box clicked. The front panel came open with a loud boom and now leaped. A clown, completely dressed wild red hair, large polka dot outfit, gigantic painted smile, in one hand a giant cardboard placard. Wedding canceled in the other, an air horn. The clown let out a thunderous honk and began giggling. Not just laughing, cackling, frantic, uncontrollable, screeching laughter that rang throughout the empty venue like a ghost curse. With one gloved hand leaping to her mouth, Emma stumbled backward. "No," she muttered. "This is not taking place. This is not taking place." She hurriedly looked at the bridesmaids, her mother and her father, but no one else was available. No applause, no guests, no music. The clown, who held the flashing sign high over his head and danced maniacally around her wedding, was the only one who ruined it. Dad fell crashing after slipping on the stone walkway while attempting to charge at the clown. Mom sank onto one of the vacant seats and began to cry. Emma stood still, her mouth wide in a mute scream, her eyes hazy. Calm and methodical, I took a step forward. "Searching for your visitors." Her voice was clear, yet quiet as I inquired. She turned to face me. Enraged. Broken. "You. Did you do this?" I gave a shrug. "What did you do?" "Alert them about a tentless circus. Inform them that the featured performer was a scam, which is why the performance was canceled." She had heavy, black rivers of makeup streaming down her cheeks. The expensive garment suddenly resembled a cheesy Halloween party costume. The clown joyfully blasted the air horn as he skipped by one again. At the last end, Emma hurled her bouquet at the clown and let out a savage animal scream that ripped from her chest. It was a long way off. Still laughing, the clown bowed theatrically before falling to the ground and waving goodbye like a performer leaving the stage. It was done. Not in a big way, with a yell rather than a muttered apology. A ruined girl wearing a filthy white dress and a clown, standing by themselves beneath a vacant arch. I turned around and left. The ideal conclusion to a drama that had been rigged against me from the beginning, the sound of that hysterical, hollow laughter trailing me like a soundtrack. Now, however, their performance was canceled and I was now the director. I left before seeing the final collapse. Not necessary. Even when you're not looking at anything, you can tell it's burning. I only looked at my phone once that evening. Mom missed many of calls, and Dad missed a few. Emma amazingly left a series of voicemails that ranged from threatening to pleading. "Make this right. I'll take you to court. Please, you're not understanding. I still consider you my brother." I didn't respond to any of them. Rather, I sat in the little apartment at my kitchen table. I watched the city lights flicker outside, already half-packed to go. The quiet and the fact that they couldn't get through to me for the first time in years felt freeing. The fallout. Their tale began to change over the next few days. Emma shared mysterious posts on the internet. Family may betray you in the worst ways at times. Dad shared a couple Facebook groups with his version. People become wild when they have money. We don't forget, but we do forgive. "Pardon me," I chuckled. "After robbing you of your wallet and punching you in the face, they would urge you to apologize for causing them harm." The trick was that no one gave a damn. No widespread pity for them. No indignation. By Monday, most people had gone on. Only Emma's grandiose illusions made the wedding a significant occasion. My own scheme. That week, I worked on improving myself. I left my position. I declared, "I'm done letting people take advantage of me starting today," as I entered my boss's office and handed over a tidy little resignation letter. She gave a nod, as if she knew more than she said. I had previously secured an alternative, a minor opportunity upstate. It was a modest property care contract in a little-known lakeside town. Nothing spectacular. It was mine, though. My choice. My fresh start. The surprising turn. Until the letter arrived, I assumed that was all. 1 week following the non-wedding, a scuffed envelope was hidden behind the door of my flat. No address for return. It only has my name. A brief, printed letter from Emma's former husband, Derek. I read that and sat down hard. "I thought you might be curious. She never captured my heart. I was coerced into becoming engaged by her. I was on the verge of withdrawing when I heard what you did. I was saved by you. I'm leaving. Departed the town. Don't try to find me. But I'm grateful. Extortion. The word reverberated. 3 times I read it again. Derek wasn't as cowardly as I had assumed. He was confined, manipulated. For years, I had been the same. The only thing that had a gleaming diamond on it was his leash, which somehow channeled all of my rage through the debris. I walked away. I had also saved another person, without even considering the family's final efforts. On the same day, Mom phoned once more. At last, I responded. "Please," she said right away. "No. Hi there. No room to breathe. Emma is not feeling good. She isn't eating. She's not sleeping. She claims that you destroyed her life. This has to be fixed. Not my circus." Calmly, I said, "My monkeys know. Her brother was meant to be you." With a feigned worry, Mom snapped the syrup. "Do you believe that abandoning her in this way improves you?" I grinned covertly. "It doesn't improve me," I said. "I feel liberated by it." I ended the call. I banned their phone numbers. I signed a new lease, updated my email, and erased the previous group conversations. The last thing I did before leaving town, I stopped one last time. A few months ago, Emma was diligently gathering funds for her ideal wedding when the bank closed. Using my name as a contingency, she had also persuaded my parents to co-sign solely. They assumed I wouldn't notice, believed that I would always be there to save them. They were mistaken. I presented a pile of papers to the bank. Evidence of fraud. Retraction of consent. Request a thorough inquiry. Unbeknownst to them, their small financial house of cards was about to fall apart, the exact cornerstone upon which they erected their lives. I was no longer willing to forgive them, keep quiet, or clean up their trash. They would be forced to dwell in the debris. A fresh start. After 2 weeks, I found myself standing on a tiny porch with a view of a silver lake. No urgent texts, no ringing phones. Don't pretend to cry. Nothing just whined among the trees. And the air's first hint of autumnal scent. That morning, I signed the last documents. I was the official owner of the maintenance company. Old, honest, although a touch worn down. It was accompanied by a little cottage, simple yet sturdy. On the same day I moved in, I carried everything by myself, box after box. Nothing from my previous life crossed the threshold. I changed my phone number when I was finished. It was printed out. It was framed. It was hung above the entrance. Just above it, a little sign made of wood. I carved myself. Clouds are not permitted. After 3 months, a letter arrived. The envelope had no name on it, not a stamp, supplied by hand. On my cottage porch, beneath a blue and gold-smeared sky, I opened it. Within one piece of paper. "You ought to return home. Emma is now attending therapy. You are forgiven by her. Without you, Mom adds, Christmas won't be the same. We all committed errors according to Dad." I read it twice. Once chuckled. "Pardon me." They were still unable to grasp it. I wasn't looking for pardon. I didn't request a place at the terrible table. I constructed the table myself. Additionally, it had no place for liars, thieves, or those who only showed affection when your wallet was open. The final exam. I secretly looked through my old burner page on Facebook out of curiosity. Emma had shared a picture of a depressing, partially empty Christmas dinner table once more. Caption: "There are those who will always put pride above family. I hope you're content." Dad had left a remark underneath. "Let go and go forward, even after they left you." Mom had included an emoticon with a sorrowful face. The same broken record was still being played. The same inexpensive ink is still being used to rewrite history. Still acting as though obedience was a requirement of love. I'm still acting like I'll come crawling back to clean up the mess they caused if they screamed loud enough. When it eventually clicked, it was the epiphany. They did not despise me. Not that they weren't in love with me. They adored my ability to help them. I enjoyed being silent. I loved my guilt. They were nothing without it, and I was no longer broken. I didn't require a conflict. I didn't have to justify myself to individuals who had created a whole existence around me as a fallback option. I wasn't even hostile toward them. A black hole's ability to draw things in makes it impossible to detest it. It simply does what it does. All you need to do is go far enough away to avoid being touched by its gravity. The last motion. I strolled into town that afternoon, little and silent. It's the type of place where folks really say good morning. I completed a straightforward form when I visited the local post office. The mailbox has a new name. There is no forwarding address. I then made my way to the hardware store on foot. I put a little wooden sign that was hand-carved beneath my mailbox and purchased a new lock for my gate. Easy, unambiguous, private property. Clowns are not permitted. When some of the older folks saw it, they laughed. "Good policy," one replied, nodding. I put my hands in my jacket pockets, grinned, and gazed out over the boundless, unrestricted Silver Lake. The surprising conclusion. The day I was completely at home in my new existence. I was surprised by something that happened. Someone called me. Not from Emma, not from Mother, not from Dad. Derek sent it. They nearly grew. I unwittingly saved the man. He remained silent. Just that he was now working on construction someplace in Montana. Joyful I was, thanked by him. Said that he regained his life on the day I called off the wedding. Expressed his wish that I might also find peace. He hung up after that. Don't make lengthy remarks. No commitments to keep in contact. Only two dudes. The same basic reality truly binds strangers. You can't always get out of the circus. You can burn it down sometimes. The last idea. I had lost my anger. Not depressed, not resentful. I had just finished. And what do you know? It turns out that pyrotechnics and large gestures are not necessary for peace. It appears at peaceful times, and being aware that you are no longer a fool to anyone. The clown wasn't me. The sideshow wasn't me. I was the one who strolled away whistling burnt down the tent and salted the ground. Because sometimes it's not enough to just survive. Being so untouchable that no one ever dares to construct a cage for you again is sometimes the true triumph. Story 3. With the exception of the clink of Derek's lawyer's pen and the shuffling of papers, the courtroom was quiet. "Your Honor," he murmured, standing and facing the judge. "She poses a threat. She has emotional instability. She is even subject to a restraining order against her own sister." I looked straight ahead. I didn't flinch, but my throat clenched. His attorney gave me a quick glance before grinning as if I had already been defeated. I said nothing at all. I knew the truth has a way of coming to light when you least expect it, not because I didn't want to. Then a woman's voice came from the rear of the courtroom. Stable and clear. I'm her sister, really, and I can offer some insight. All heads turned. The judge seems astounded as well. She moved as if she belonged at the front of the courtroom past the lawyers and the benches. Then it was Naomi, and everything was different. Elena Kerr is my name. In the past, I believed I had an excellent feel of people. As a school counselor, I work. I've worked with teenagers for years, encouraging them to talk about topics they previously believed they would never utter aloud. However, I didn't notice it in my own house for some reason. It wasn't until things had begun to come apart that I realized Derek's true nature. We met at an alumni function at the institution. He captivated others with his charisma, self-assurance, and warmth. Everyone admired him. I enjoyed him. I laughed at him, asked insightful questions, and expressed his admiration for my commitment to my profession. On that first night, we spoke for hours. We were married a year later. At first, I thought I had at last met someone who genuinely understood me. We purchased a little suburban house. 3 years into our marriage, we welcomed our son, Micah. Derek was affable and focused. He made sure I had time for my interests and gave me coffee every morning. However, things gradually altered. He began to provide minor critiques. He would fix my speech to Micah. When I described my day to him, he would raise an eyebrow as though my troubles were unimportant or overblown. He didn't shout. Then, no. He didn't smash anything or bang doors. Rather, he gave me the impression that I was exaggerating, as if I weren't as intelligent as I believed and I was sensitive and forgetful. It was subtle manipulation, the sort that creeps in and makes you wonder whether you're the one who's doing improperly. He started separating me from those who had grounded me. He claimed that my sister Naomi was a negative influence who enjoyed causing conflict and drama between us. She had said horrible things behind my back, he told me. I trusted him. He would show me messages that were not relevant, screenshots that gave Naomi a mean or envious appearance. I began to distance myself from her. I cut her off when she attempted to reach out. More than anything, I regret that. Derek's transformation began when Micah was 5 years old. He was no longer merely domineering. He was icy. He would punish me with days of silence if I didn't agree with him. He would call me dramatic if I cried. He would threaten me if I attempted to establish limits. Quiet suggestions of what he could take away rather than ones that were loud and obvious. You know a court would never believe you. He'd say, I'm stable. I have a good job. You cry over the dishwasher. By the time I realized what was happening, I felt completely alone. I didn't even recognize myself. I wasn't the strong woman I used to be. I was exhausted, unsure, and constantly apologizing for things I couldn't name. I left him after one night when Micah came into our room and asked Mommy, why is Daddy so mad at you all the time? That was my breaking point. I packed a bag while Derek was at work and took Micah to my parents' house. It was the first time I had done something without Derek's approval in years. I expected him to beg for us back to try and explain things. Instead, he went straight to legal threats. He filed for divorce and petitioned for full custody. In his statements, he painted me as unstable, unreliable, and emotionally erratic. He claimed I was dangerous around Micah. He said I had outbursts and that I had alienated myself from my own family, including my sister, who, according to his lawyer, had filed a restraining order against me. That was the first I had heard of it. I sat in court listening to his attorney list off lies, twisting every painful memory into a weapon. My attorney leaned in and whispered, "Do you want to respond to that about your sister?" I said no. I didn't want to fight fire with fire. I wanted facts. And the fact was, I hadn't spoken to Naomi in nearly 2 years. Not because I hated her, but because I was convinced she hated me. I had no idea she was even in the courtroom. No idea she'd been following the case or had something to say. But she was there. And when she stood up, everything I thought I understood about what was happening, everything Derek had tried to make the world believe, began to unravel. I had never been in a courtroom before the custody trial. I thought it would be more formal, more rigid. Instead, it felt like a theater where my life was being performed without my permission. And Derek was the one writing the script. He walked in that day looking polished, crisp suit, clean shave, calm expression. He even smiled at the bailiff. If you didn't know him, you'd think he was just a father trying to do what was best for his child. That's what he wanted the judge to believe. That's what he had worked so hard to build, a version of himself that looked credible and safe, and a version of me that didn't. His lawyer, a woman named Clarissa Wynn, had the kind of voice that made everything sound rational even when she was twisting the truth. She stood confidently in front of the judge and began painting a picture I didn't recognize. She said I was emotionally unstable, that I had erratic behavior, and that I was incapable of making calm decisions in the interest of our son. She used words like impulsive, high-strung, and self-isolating. She said I had a pattern of pushing away the people closest to me and that this included my own family. Then came the moment that took the air out of the room. He turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, I'd also like to point out that Miss Kerr's own sister has filed a restraining order against her." That should give the court great pause regarding her emotional fitness to parent. I froze for a second. I couldn't breathe. My thoughts raced. Was that true? Had Naomi really gone that far? I tried to recollect the last words we exchanged. It was a tough conversation, angry even, but it wasn't violent. There had never been threats. Don't shout. just a melancholy stillness that stretched between us after too many misunderstandings and too much intervention from Derek. I looked at my attorney. She murmured, "Do you want to respond?" I gave a head shake. I no longer knew what was real. I didn't believe my own memories since I had been gaslighted for so long. Wouldn't I know if Naomi had filed something I would have been served, wouldn't I? Calmly, Clarissa flipped through a folder and went on. She provided no evidence. She failed to turn in a paperwork, the statement alone. Only the germ of uncertainty. That was Derek's plan. He didn't require information. He required ambiguity. He required the judge to pause and consider me. I sat in silence. Keeping my face neutral, I folded my hands in my lap. I was aware that if I displayed rage, everyone would be watching me. It would validate their account. I would be perceived as weak if I wept. So I looked directly ahead. I attempted to ignore the pain behind my eyes and maintained a regular breathing pattern. Derek kept a close eye on me. When his lawyer lied, he didn't bat an eye. He didn't correct the statement or raise an objection. He desired it to be seen. He wanted everyone in the courtroom to think I had ruined everything, even those that he burned himself. The last thing that connected me to the me before he had been was Naomi. And even though it had been a while since we had spoken, there was still a part of me that hoped she would come through if I ever needed her. But as the minutes went by and she didn't show up, I started to think that perhaps he had prevailed. Perhaps he had made her too hostile toward me. Clarissa was questioned by the judge whether she had any records of the restraining order. She answered thoughtfully, "Although we are working to acquire the file, we are certain of the assertion based on reliable information provided by Mr. Kane." My lawyer protested, saying that since no such document had been received, it shouldn't be taken into consideration until it was presented. The judge made a note, but nodded. Suddenly, a falsehood had been uttered into the record. I couldn't stop wondering what Micah would think if he were old enough to comprehend what was going on. What would he remember, I wondered? Would he recall my efforts to keep things safe and gentle? Or would he grow up thinking I was the person his father had made me out to be? I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life as I sat in that courtroom with strangers making decisions about my future. I heard the voice, Bill. "I'm her sister, really, and I can offer some insight." It seemed as though time had stopped when Naomi's voice could be heard clearly throughout the courtroom. Her tone was instantly familiar, even though I hadn't heard her speak in 2 years. Under it, shaky but confident. The courtroom changed. People turned. The judge leaned forward a little and arched her brows. "Pardon me," replied the judge. "Who are you?" Naomi came out of the rear row. Her attire didn't suggest that she was there to sit quietly. She had on a fitted blue jacket. She pulled her hair back. She appeared robust. "My name is Naomi Kerr. Elena's sister is me." Startled, Clarissa Wynne glanced up. Derek strained the moment she muttered something to him. "I think I need to correct the record, but I'm not on the witness list," Naomi remarked. After glancing at the bailiff, the judge led her ahead. With a poise that gave the impression that she belonged there, Naomi moved past the rows of chairs and up to the front. My heart was racing. Why she was there was a mystery to me. I was unsure if she had come to assist him or myself. It had been a week since I last spoke to her. Derek sent me her private texts and accused me of being emotionally abusive. I tried to contact her later, but she never responded. I believed she was permanently gone. Naomi faced the magistrate. "No restraining order exists. My sister has never been the target of one of mine. It's a lie." Clarissa got to her feet. "We thought the judge was holding up her hand, Your Honor. Let her talk." Naomi's eyes were filled with something when she gazed at me. It was years since I'd seen them. Perhaps grief or remorse. "I stopped talking to my sister 2 years ago. I made unwarranted assumptions about her. Because someone I trusted showed me screenshots, texts, and partial truths that portrayed her as manipulative, I believe things. Now I see I was being exploited." There had been silence in the courtroom. Derek sat still, his face inscrutable. His jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Naomi continued. Derek informed me that she was emotionally abusing Micah and that she was unstable. He said that she was paranoid and that she was deliberately isolating herself. All she did, he claimed, was bring people down. She hesitated. He was composed and persuasive, and he always had a logical account of events, so I trusted him. Furthermore, I was unaware that I was simply another somebody he needed to keep her away from. The judge listened carefully while leaning back in her chair. No restraining order was filed by me. Naomi reiterated strongly, "Never would I do it." I was tricked into believing it was in her best interest, so I broke off communication. I was mistaken. My hands were shaking. I had been holding on to the chair's arms so hard that I was unaware of it. I was having trouble breathing. The guilt of being rejected by the one person who knew me the best had been with me for months. And now she was in the public eye speaking the truth. Naomi obviously turned to look at me. "I apologize," she said. "I ought to have given a call. I ought to have asked you straight. Now that I'm here, I want to assist in repairing what I damaged." Clarissa caught the judge's attention. "Would you mind providing an explanation, counsel, for submitting a claim without supporting documentation?" "Ever composed," Clarissa said. "We are now checking the testimony that we relied on from Mr. Kane. That won't be enough in the future." Judge cut in. "In my courtroom, we take false claims seriously." Derek's normally composed expression vanished. There was a flicker of something I had never seen before when he looked toward Naomi. Fear. In that instant, I became aware of how much his strength depended on solitude and stillness. And in front of everyone, Naomi had just broken it. The judge turned back to Naomi. "What more would you want to add?" She gave a nod. "Only one thing. I would like to be recorded. I have faith in my sister. I regret ever giving her the impression that she is not a good mother. I felt noticed for the first time during that whole trial. Not only supported, but actually comprehended. The one who had previously left me had returned, and the truth had entered the room in her guise. Everything started to change as soon as Naomi got up, not just in the courtroom, but also within me. I hadn't said anything. I didn't want to play the game Derek was playing, so I decided not to defend myself that day. Instead of despair, I had opted for silence. And Naomi spoke truth into the hush. I stopped feeling helpless at that point. When Naomi had done speaking, the judge sat silently for a while. She glanced up at Derek, then down at her papers. She spoke more firmly, yet calmly, than previously. "Did you directly inform your legal team, Mr. Kane, that your ex-wife's sister had submitted a restraining order?" Derek lost his temper. He moved around in his chair, cleared his throat, and made an effort to respond fluidly. "At the time, it was what I understood." "Was there a miscommunication?" the judge inquired. "Perhaps a purposeful deception?" He didn't answer. With a harsh tone, the judge added, "I'm going to ask again. Did you intentionally mislead your legal team in an effort to undermine Miss Kerr's credibility at a custody hearing?" He gave Clarissa a quick look. She didn't give him anything. Evidently, attempting to recalibrate, Derek let out a breath through his nostrils. It was my understanding that Naomi had already filed a lawsuit. I had no intention of misleading the court. Naomi took another step forward. "I want to make a clarification, Your Honor. Early on in the custody fight, I received emails from Derek. He made hints that he would bring out personal information about myself and my partner if I didn't support his assertions. He desired to steer the story. He ceased to communicate with me when I refused to cooperate. In that instant, the courtroom appeared to contract. The tension in the air increased. I was no longer the center of attention for the first time. He was responsible. Rose, my lawyer. We would want to propose that the veracity and intent of all previous assertions made by Mr. Kane and his legal counsel be reevaluated." The magistrate gave a nod. "I'll be formally investigating the statement that was turned in under Mr. Kane's name. Additionally, we will proceed with testimony based on the presumption that Ms. Kerr's credibility has been unjustly questioned in the absence of reliable proof. For the remainder of the hearing, Derek remained silent. He didn't have to. By the time the judge called a recess, he had already caused himself harm. I remained in my chair for a few more seconds than I should have. That wait was necessary. I had to sense what was going on. Naomi approached me and knelt next to me. She said, "I wanted to come sooner." I had no idea how to make it better. I detest the fact that I allowed him to use me as a weapon. With tears welling up but not spilling, I nodded. "I appreciate you being here." "I promise not to vanish again," she replied. "You are no longer alone." Before rendering a temporary custody decision, the judge gave closing statements to both parties when the court reconvened. At this moment, the court sees no reason to deny Ms. Kerr her shared parenting rights. For the next 90 days, custody will continue to work in tandem with an outside assessor to keep an eye on any communications between Mr. Kane and his kid. Following the completion of thorough psychiatric and character assessments, final custody will be decided. It seemed unbelievable to me. I had finally been heard after months of anxiety, unfounded charges, and the gradual erosion of my self-confidence. As I collected my belongings, the judge had seen right through him. A small sketch of the three of us, me, him, and a tiny puppy he planned to acquire someday, was one of Micah's drawings that fell out of my folder. I took it in my palm and kept it there. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, my heart stabilized. Derek didn't look at me as he passed by. There was no sneer on his face for once. Didn't make an effort to discredit me with a sly remark. He simply walked away. Naomi stood at the doorway, waiting. She strolled next to me as we went outdoors into the sunlight, present but silent. In the courtroom, that was crucial. The paperwork had been in my name. It's my reputation on the line. But my tale wasn't the only one. Every woman who had ever been told she was overly emotional was the target. All mothers who have been accused of being unstable because they asserted their authority. It was nearly too late for any sister to realize she was being fooled. That day, everything changed when Naomi spoke. She made a difference in my heart as much as in the courtroom. Derek's attempt at erasing me came back to life, clearer, stronger, and no longer isolated. It took me a while to cry after the hearing. I didn't, even though I believed I would. I believe I was still holding my breath, anticipating a mishap. I was waiting for someone to inform me that I was not truly relieved. However, it was. I sat on Micah's room floor that evening while he played with his toy vehicles. He asked if I would help him construct a garage after lining them up on the rug in a little procession. Yes, I did. We didn't discuss anything serious like court or his father. All we did was play. "You seem happy again," he added, looking up at me in the midst of it. I was devastated by the sentence. "Thank you," I said as I clung to him. Again and again. He immediately gave me a hug in return, even though he had no idea what I had done to deserve his gratitude. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild both my identity and my custody case. For women who had experienced emotional abuse during custody disputes, I joined a support group. I began going to a therapist on a regular basis. I went back to sleeping through the night. The next week, Naomi and I went out for coffee. It wasn't simple. At first, there was a great deal of stillness. Between long breaths and coffee sips, there was a great deal of heartbreaking honesty. She apologized to me for not posing any questions, for thinking I was who Derek said I was. I admitted to her that I wasn't proud of the way I had excluded her and disregarded my own intuition in favor of his influence. We made no effort to seem as though everything was flawless. We concluded we were worth the effort, even if we didn't refer to ourselves as complete or healed. Sisters are able to reconnect with one another despite the world's attempts to tear them apart. For several more months, the custody dispute persisted. Derek's blatant tendencies of domineering conduct were exposed by the judge's order for a psychiatric evaluation. What I had experienced was validated by the evaluator's assessment. The truth gradually constructed its own record piece by piece. Evidence, not just my words. In the end, Micah's main custody was given to me. In addition to required therapy and a parenting class mandated by the court, Derek was given supervised visits. I didn't feel victorious. This had nothing to do with victory or retaliation. It was about making a life where I could parent fearlessly, where I could breathe without having to be cautious, and where my kid could feel safe. I wouldn't have believed you if you had told me a year ago that the person who once vowed to love me would be standing in court accusing me of being dangerous. I may have laughed angrily if you had told me that my sister would be the one to bring the truth to light. However, life might take you by surprise when you least expect it. This is what I've discovered. Being silent does not imply weakness. You're not giving up if you decide not to defend yourself right away. It might occasionally indicate that you're waiting for the truth to enter alongside you. I didn't win the case that day because I yelled more loudly or gave it more thought. I prevailed because I remained true to myself. I waited. I had faith that the falsehoods would fall apart on their own, and they did. I want you to know that if you're watching this and someone has attempted to minimize you, make you feel unworthy, or make you feel like your voice is unimportant, it is not necessary to get permission to speak the truth. It just takes a second. That moment can occasionally come from someone else. Sometimes it originates within you, but it will happen. I'm no longer just getting by. I'm still alive. We live in harmony as I raise my son. I'm trying to get back in touch with the sibling I believed was gone. And I'm recalling who I was before I was persuaded to be someone else. That courtroom attempted to determine my identity. However, I made my own decision in the end. I appreciate you seeing my tale. I want you to know you're not alone if it resonated with you and you've ever felt ignored, misunderstood, or that someone tried to change the truth. Your voice counts. Your narrative is important. And sometimes the most effective thing you can do is to choose to remain silent. Would you kindly like this video if it touched you? Leave a comment below and forward it to someone who should hear it. Your tale, your opinions, or even just a brief statement would be greatly appreciated. That's enough for me to remain upright. For more true tales of overcoming adversity, finding courage, and rising again if you haven't already subscribed to the channel. Remember that your truth is valuable, and take care of yourself, even if someone attempts to turn it off.